So I decided to do another video inside today. It's pretty hot outside here in the Bay Area. And I wanted to talk about a discovery that I made within the last year about from a TED talk from a neuroscientist talking about how our brain perceives reality. And of course they had one of those really catchy video titles like our entire reality is hallucinated, but they go into the science of it, and it was actually quite fascinating. So it turns out that everything we hear, see, taste, and touch are all sensory inputs. And smell, of course, too. All the five senses. They're all sensory inputs. But the actual process of, processing reality is somewhere between knowledge and an imagination. And this is actually a really, really fascinating scientific discovery. They realized that the pineal gland is kind of like the power button for our ability to boot up into reality, to turn our computer on in our brain. So when we start perceiving reality from the moment we wake up to sleep mode when we're asleep, the power button, it goes on when we're alive and it goes off when we're dead. The power button is the pineal gland, and it's this gland that secretes a chemical called DMT. And this was mind-blowing to me because if you're unfamiliar with DMT, DMT is the active ingredient in acid and MDMA, hallucinogens. I mean, it's in everything from magic mushrooms with the active ingredient of psilocybin to ayahuasca, which is a naturally occurring high container for DMT that usually in the Amazon they put it in like a tea. And this is pretty fascinating because I'm realizing, holy cow, everything that psychedelics are based on, the actual chemical of DMT, if you are to sell that, it is a Class A controlled substance. And now I'm realizing it's generated in our brain. It's really generated in our brain. And interestingly enough, a healthy amount is like microdosing on shrooms every single day. And that's mind-blowing to me. I'm like, if we have a healthy brain, we're essentially taking mushrooms daily. And this makes a lot of sense why some people are microdosing things like, I think it's like acid in the Bay Area. But this is really, really interesting to me because essentially they're realizing that there's two ways that your brain secretes this DMT. And one of them is low production mode and high production mode. And depending on your personality type and all sorts of things, this can come across differently. And what's really interesting is if we don't use the pineal gland enough, it starts to calcify and secretes less. And one way that scientists are researching over in Europe, usually they're on the leading edge of stuff that we would typically find illegal in America. Usually they make breakthroughs that in the United States or North America, we catch up about 10 to 15 years later. And over the past 5 or 10 years, they've been researching using psilocybin. Now, like I said, that's the active ingredient in what on the streets is called magic mushrooms. And what's really interesting is they're finding that they are able to use that to essentially decalcify the pineal gland in the human brain. Now, how does this have medical applications? I mean, like, because I'm not really one for recreational inebriation. I don't like getting drunk. I don't like even feeling buzzed. I don't like feeling high. I don't like feeling buzzed at all. I use cannabis maybe a few times a month recreationally, but it's almost like when people use video games to calm down. So I have really, really low tolerance, and it is essentially like, from what I've been able to test with myself, I can get drunk on half of an O'Doul's. Now, if you're not a drinker, that's a non-alcoholic beer. So for me, recreation is, the importance of having fun to relax. So if you ever use fun for your mental health, that's even for me, recreation, it has everything to do with health and mental health. So I don't necessarily use things recreationally. I think that's been stigmatized as partying or just, indulging. I am very health conscious, and I've been gaining a lot of traction over the past year, not just in my mental health, but my physical health as well. So what does this have to do with psychedelics? Well, what I realized is if the pineal gland secretes DMT, what I've come to learn is that there's also a lot of research with a calcified pineal gland and anxiety, stress, and literally all forms of mental illness. And what they're starting to discover now, this is on the edge of scientific discoveries, is that mental illness is actually one side of a coin. And we've been led to believe our entire lives that mental illness is only bad, but that's like believing that one-sided coins exist. If they do, they're fake, because if you have a coin with, two tails or two heads on it, you're about to be scammed. So what they're finding out is that there is a healthy side to mental illness, and they don't really have a name for these, but they're the positive outcomes. When you remove anxiety and stress from the equation, mental illnesses can manifest in a multitude of different ways. And for example, without stress and anxiety, schizophrenia can be visual representations of thought patterns and help people do anything from come up with innovative or inventive engineering ideas to mathematical equations. And it reminds me a lot of what I see special effects for heads-up displays in movies. And this is all by literally just removing stress rooted from anxiety, which is something I went my entire life thinking that anxiety is normal, but we're not really supposed to experience anxiety unless we're in imminent danger. There's actually no healthy amount of subtle anxiety, which is the exact opposite of what I was taught my entire life, especially studying and practicing mental illness. And what I'm realizing is over the past couple of years, when I've been focusing on this stuff, researching this stuff, I did some tests, and I realized I had a pretty normal, for society standards, emission of DMT in my pineal gland, what is considered normal. But since last year, I have learned that I have an overactive pineal gland now. And this is the equivalent of taking about half a gram of mushrooms a day, all day, constantly, always being on that high. And I you know, like, this was last year, and I had never taken magic mushrooms, had never done a psychedelic, like, had maybe used cannabis maybe a dozen times medicinally to get over things such as my limp and other things in the past. So essentially, I'm in a constant state of inebriation just by how my brain works. And what I'm starting to see is that there is a direct causation between the amount of work that I did using emotional intelligence and other, I guess you could call them new wave mental health practices stemming from the rise in positive psychology over the past 15 years, or 25 years, I guess. It's really been gaining traction in the past 10 to 15, but I didn't even hear the term until last year. So I've mostly been studying what's called emotional intelligence, and it's like learning how to master your emotions as opposed to just, controlling them, putting them into a box, trying to run away from them. And it's been working phenomenally well. Over the past year, I have started writing again. I have started drawing again. I have started all sorts of creative habits that I haven't done for years. I've started designing again, and I've started painting, but digitally painting, and it's been really, really fascinating. And what I've discovered is that there's a way to jumpstart this process, as what we've been discovering, the human family has been discovering over in Europe. And this has everything to do with using psychedelics in their rawest form, like psilocybin, mushrooms, or other forms of naturally occurring DMT like ayahuasca. And what's really, really interesting is they are able to do things such as jumpstart. Imagine being able to take a pill where you wake up and you don't have anxiety, you don't have depression, you don't have PTSD, you don't have all the emotional stuff. You still have the memories. So here's the thing, it's not a cure-all in perpetuity. It's literally just a way to jumpstart yourself so you don't have to spend years and years, or potentially decades, working things backwards with mental health to the point where you can break yourself back to like emotional zero and start rebuilding. Like the whole idea of like you have to build on a firm foundation. If you don't, you need to tear down the building, build a firmer foundation, and start over again. I mean, anybody who knows anything about construction understands like how detrimental not having a solid, strong foundation can be, and how much of a waste of time and money it can be. And the same is true with mental health. But what's really, really fascinating is when it comes to the brain, which is like a computer, using naturally occurring, not the LSD, not the MDMA, not the acid, but literally using naturally occurring DMT things such as mushrooms, which use psilocybin, which is a naturally occurring container for DMT that just happens to be found in some variations of mushrooms. And the DMT that's found in ayahuasca, it's a vine. And these sort of things can be used like a reboot button. And just like we know that you can go through troubleshooting your computer, but like, have you tried turning it off and turning it back on? And we know how powerful that can be. This is like that for your brain. It doesn't do anything to your memories, your personality, other than potentially improve it temporarily. We still have to do the work of having a mental health framework and practicing good mental health, or else even the memories of the stress, even the memories of the anxiety, if we don't have a healthy framework, we'll turn back into the PTSD symptoms, all the anxiety, depression, and mental illness symptoms that we're so afraid of when it comes to mental illness. But here's the thing. How did all of a sudden humanity have like an 80% diagnosable rate of mental illness? And with the increasing number of mental illnesses that can be diagnosed, there is literally no one that cannot be diagnosed with a mental illness. Either we're wrong with all these types of ways to categorize ways of thinking, dependencies, all sorts of things that can cause bad symptoms in our lives, or we're missing the obviousness that there's two sides to this coin, and that with every negative, there's a positive. And it looks to me like there's such a thing as almost mental powers. And, at one time I was diagnosed with bipolar. I still technically am. And what I found is that with the anxiety that melted away, with the stress that melted away, my mood cycles became creative cycles. I'm now stable. I no longer have suicidal thoughts on the daily like I used to several times a day. I still get stressed so bad sometimes that over the past, year or so, I've had suicidal thoughts twice, but I was able to dismiss them and not obsess about them, because the suicidal thoughts, contrary to popular belief, do not mean you're broken, do not mean that you're actually going to do it. You still have the choice to commit suicide even if you have suicidal thoughts. So even experiencing that does not mean you are broken, or does not even mean you're actually suicidal. Being suicidal means you are seeking to act on suicidal thoughts. And this is something that's also not commonly understood. Having suicidal thoughts is actually a way for our brain to say, get the hell out of here, do something differently, change up your framework. What you're doing does not work. And this happens so often with creative types, people who suffer, with the more emotional side of reality, that we have come to think that bipolar disorder literally means people are suicidal, which means they're more actually, it doesn't mean that. It means that they're actually more prone to suicidal thoughts. And what's really, really interesting is at the base of it, I found that I have really an anxiety problem and autism. And what I realized is when I learned anxiety methods that are designed for people with autism, I was able to work back and reverse engineer my anxiety, get control of my bipolar in 5 days. 5 days. Each day, after 2 decades of therapy and medication, I was able to work back the rapid cycles. I was able to work back the depression. I was able to work back the mania, which is really interesting because now, which I was always sedated, so I really only had the mania when I was really, really nervous or worried, which from 25 onward was all the freaking time. So I was experiencing in those times what was called hypomania. And what's really painful about that is I wasn't able to think straight. I went into paranoid delusions if I was in them for too long and didn't take a break from things. But now what's really interesting and really kind of odd for my family is I still kind of talk like I'm manic or hypomanic, but I'm able to keep a rational train of thought. And what I'm finding is that these are my creative, almost flow of consciousness, as some people would call it. It's my creative flow, and I've started recording them, and most people wouldn't even know how to identify mania. But what's really interesting is I'm not manic. My heart rate doesn't go up. It's just a habit, because my thoughts are moving so quickly, I'm trying to keep up with my thoughts. So I'm able to think this quickly and speak this quickly, even though actually my thoughts are moving incredibly faster than my ability to speak. But for the first time ever in my life over the past year, I haven't been losing my train of thought to the delusions that were stemming from anxiety. And it's quite fascinating. My heart rate doesn't go up. My heart rate doesn't go up unless I'm angry, which rarely happens anymore. unless you're looking from the outside, when I'm talking about something that's important, it can look like I'm angry because my voice gets loud, I get very short in my language, but I'm actually not angry. And this is very, very fascinating because when I was dealing with the hypomania from the anxiety, I would get angry at the drop of a hat. And now I have communication styles that still resemble things like mania and anger. But I'm actually able to keep a stable train of thought. My body's getting healthier. Like I've lost, like I've talked about in some other vlogs, I've lost according to the scale, about 130 pounds, but I've gained close to 50 pounds in muscle. I'm getting incredibly healthier. And it's to the point where I know my brain is getting healthier too. My long-term memory, which I struggled with for years, over the past year, has come back in a rate that feels like a superpower to me. And I'm realizing that I learned to meditate last year, but now I use what I call micro meditations. And I'm able to, like a file directory, go to the big picture of what I want to remember, think about it a little bit, process, go down, break it up into more files, go deeper and deeper and deeper. And the more times I access these file paths, it's like they're in the recent history. But something, that is from years ago could take a while, sometimes hours or even days to access that. But once it does, it's in that recent history again. So this has made learning very different now. Now I'm forming habits, and I'm able to pull habits out of a file system as opposed to memorize skills. So it kind of emulates skills, but I have to do a lot more warm-ups this way, which it's actually low stress, low anxiety, and I'm able to pick things up quicker than ever before. And these are all things that are blowing my mind. And I'm realizing that we have this American idea that the right type of medicine is patented medicine. And while I still believe that patented medicine helped keeping me from killing myself, it was the social ideal that patented medicine is safe medicine is pretty much what pushed me to the point that I needed patented medicine. I would have never been depressed or suicidal or, manic if I didn't believe that I was broken, which is part of that single-sided coin of mental illness that it has become the status quo in America. And this is not necessarily specifically an American problem. I mean, religions in America believe this as well, and businesses have adopted this ideology, and social structures, even nonprofits. It's pretty much the American way to believe that certain types of drugs are safe because they can be patented, and other ones that can't be patented because they're naturally occurring must be dangerous. And what I'm realizing is if we wait for doctors to do scientific medical research on things that are illegal, we are believing in a logical fallacy. In other words, we're believing these, what they used to call 100 years ago patent medicine con men, back when they were literally selling snake oil. Not so much anymore, but they've gone into real products now. But what's really interesting is we have gotten to the point where we have believed them so absolutely that we're missing this very convenient lie that I don't believe that a lot of business owners, a lot of, industries, a lot of nonprofits, or even a lot of religions even realized. I don't think they even recognize this logical fallacy. And this logical fallacy is doctors aren't allowed to do medical research on illegal substances without risking losing their license. They have to get government approval to do medical testing on illegal substances. But even if they're able to do that, they are not allowed to use them on living creatures. So how are you supposed to get medical research that leads to products that people can use if doctors that are practicing on real people aren't allowed to do medical research? They're not allowed to suggest these things to their patients, which are literally what's needed to advance the research forward. Look, certain things can't be patented, like herbs and certain things like that, but doctors are allowed to prescribe supplements. I've had a psychiatrist that prescribed me supplements and minerals to help balance out some of the prescribed drugs that I was taking. He was a genius. He still is a genius. He's still alive. And if you're in the Southern California area and you need somebody that you can go to that is covered by mainstream medicine that also respects the bigger picture, hit me up with a direct message and I can get your referral. But and what's really interesting is, like, if supplements can be useful, if we believe supplements can be useful and they're not criminalized, they're not illegal, and doctors are allowed to suggest them to their patients, but doctors with patients aren't allowed to suggest things that are illegal, that can't be patented, that could help people with PTSD, with suicidal depression, reboot and make progress in weeks rather than years or decades. Are we just opting into treatment plans rather than, working to cure ourselves with hard work? Because, a magic pill that can cure you doesn't exist, but hard work can. But some people are at a point where there is not enough time to do that kind of hard work. So are we really willing to risk lives of not just adults anymore, but children? Children. This is why people are afraid of sending their kids to school, because the anxiety has gotten so far out of hand that parents can't even feel safe sending their children to school. So here's the thing. We need to demand it publicly as individuals. We need to say that we want these things decriminalized. And I'm not saying yell it to the pulpit. I'm saying share what you know. Share these stories. They're abundant and they're out there. I'm not one advocating for legalization so people can party with these things. I tell people not to use alcohol recreationally. That's my advice on people. So at this point, what I'm understanding is we're on the edge of knowing more, but our beliefs are getting in the way. And here's the thing. Beliefs are not absolute. The more we know how to believe. And what's really interesting is every expert in every industry, from medicine to government to nonprofits to research to academia to religion, all of them have been wrong at certain points about, some of the outlying beliefs. I mean, a lot of the religions in America in the 1960s were anti the civil rights movement. A lot of nonprofits and corporations were anti, the women's suffragette movement, and religions as well. And the government was anti these things as well. So that's the world we live in. If we, the people, can share our stories as a grassroots, unafraid to say we believe in the future, and we believe that knowing more does not mean we know better. We can wait for those people who are supposed to know better to catch up to what the people say. And this is it. It's understanding that no one knows everything on this earth. So we have to give everyone at every level the benefit of the doubt and not shame them and guilt them for not knowing more. It's really difficult to know more. And some people are in some positions where I can't have anything but empathy for the position that they're in, trying to rule a world or a multi-conglomerate organization or, a country or a church or whatever. Like, they can't know everything. And if we shame them or guilt them to thinking that they should know better, they're going to tell us to essentially humble ourselves, to calm down. So let's understand where our position is in life and tell our story to the people who actually care about our story, the people who are actually in our day-to-day. That's how movements like these spread. Because it's not about fun and games. It's not about making money. It's about doing what's right. Doing right by children suffering anxiety, being pushed to unbelievable lengths to have disorders at ages they shouldn't have disorders. And to some people being pushed to the point where they have their humanity conditioned out of them by bullying, family life, who knows? And this is inhumane. And we have to ask ourselves, is any belief worth the lives of children? That's where I'm going to leave this video with my plea. This isn't about knowing better. This is just about knowing more. And it doesn't hurt to learn more. Learning doesn't mean converting. Conversion isn't some magical process. We don't convert unless we want to. So learn, and let's challenge our beliefs to see how we can make them better. It's not about full-on converting to some, psychedelic cult. It's not like full-on converting to becoming some hippie. It's literally compromising our comfort to save children, to save the lives of children. Because there's no reason children in grade school should be having anxiety for half the time. They don't even know why, because their parents are having anxiety because they don't even know if their children are safe. So let's learn more, which is a type of doing. Let's do more by learning more. Learn more, learn more, learn more. Anything that feels good, we need to take with a ton of salt and go for the things that don't feel good. The things that are talked about by boring scientists that have no selling point, because that's what I've had to wade through, this boring, mind-numbing muck with no catchiness to it. Just like if you can make it to the end of this video and understand that I'm telling you to essentially avoid the people who sound like me. Or if you didn't make it to the end of this video, to look at the people who sound like me. The people who have learned so much that I understand now. I offend people all the time because they believe that I know better, but I don't. I've just learned so much that I don't know if I'm smart or if I'm crazy or if I'm just learned so much that somehow I found out how to learn my way to being stupid. I don't know. But it's for the children, and it's worth a shot.